Mel Kiper just absolutely exploded on live television, and I'm not talking about some mild criticism or polite disagreement. I'm talking about a full-blown, no-holds-barred assault on Kevin Stefanski and the entire Cleveland Browns organization that's now spreading across every social media platform like wildfire. And the accusations Kiper is making aren't just about bad coaching or questionable play calling. He's saying that what's happening to Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland right now is deliberate career sabotage, systematic destruction of a talented young quarterback before he ever gets a legitimate opportunity to prove what he can do on an NFL field. Before we dive deep into what Kiper said and why it matters so much, let me set the stage for you because the context here is absolutely crucial to understanding just how explosive this situation has become. Mel Kiper has been analyzing draft prospects and evaluating quarterbacks for decades. This isn't some hot take artist looking for clicks or some former player with an axe to grind. This is arguably the most respected draft analyst in the history of football media, someone whose opinion carries serious weight with fans, executives, and coaches across the league. When Mel Kiper goes scorched earth on an organization, people listen. When he accuses a coaching staff of deliberately burying talent, that's not something you can just brush off or ignore. So Kiper gets on air, and he's talking about the Browns quarterback situation, which has been an absolute disaster for basically the entire existence of the current franchise since they came back in 1999. And he brings up Baker Mayfield, which is where this whole thing starts getting really interesting and really damaging for Cleveland's reputation. Remember Baker Mayfield, the guy who was the #1 overall pick, who came in with massive hype and expectations, who actually gave Browns fans hope for the first time in forever. The quarterback who took Cleveland to the playoffs, who had them one game away from potentially making a Super Bowl run, who showed flashes of being a legitimate franchise quarterback. What did Cleveland do with Baker Mayfield? They threw him away like yesterday's garbage. They gave up on him, ran him out of town, treated him like he was the problem when in reality, the organizational dysfunction was killing any chance he had to succeed. And where is Baker now? He's in Tampa Bay, absolutely balling out, leading his team, making plays, proving that when you put a talented quarterback in the right situation with proper support and competent coaching, he can thrive. Kiper sits there and says flat out that Baker should still be in Cleveland, and honestly, can anyone with functioning eyes and basic football knowledge actually argue with that assessment? Look at what Baker is doing right now compared to what Cleveland has at the quarterback position. The contrast is painful and embarrassing for the Browns. But then Kiper takes it to another level entirely when he starts talking about Shedeur Sanders specifically, and this is where the bombshell really drops that should make every Browns fan and every Shedeur supporter sit up and pay very close attention. Kiper reveals that 9 NFL executives, not scouts or low-level analysts, but actual executives making millions of dollars whose entire professional existence revolves around correctly evaluating quarterback talent, had Shedeur Sanders graded as the #1 quarterback prospect at this same time last year. 9 separate evaluators at the highest level of professional football all independently concluded that Shedeur was the top quarterback in this class. So what changed between then and draft day? Did Shedeur suddenly forget how to read defenses? Did his arm strength mysteriously disappear overnight? Did he lose his football intelligence or his leadership ability or any of the traits that made him special? Absolutely nothing changed on the field. His tape was still excellent. His production was still there. His measurables were still impressive. But his draft stock fell anyway. And according to the inside information that's been circulating, it fell for reasons that had nothing to do with his actual ability to play quarterback at the NFL level. Then Kiper says something that should send chills down the spine of every Browns fan and every person who cares about how young quarterbacks are developed in this league. He says, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is the essence of what he meant, that organizations ruin players. They ruin quarterbacks. Not injuries, not lack of talent, not bad luck. The organizations themselves systematically destroy quarterback careers before they even have a chance to develop. And he's specifically talking about Cleveland when he says this. He's looking directly at the Browns' dysfunction and calling it out by name. Think about what Kiper is really saying here because it's a devastating indictment of how Cleveland operates. The Browns have finished in last place in the AFC North 15 times since 2002. 15 times. That's not a small sample size. That's not a run of bad luck or a few unfortunate seasons. That's a pattern of organizational failure that spans decades and multiple coaching staffs and front offices. That's a culture problem that destroys talent and wastes careers. That's exactly the kind of environment where a talented young quarterback goes to die professionally. Now let's talk about what actually happened with Shedeur in the draft process, because this is where the story gets complicated and controversial and reveals a lot about how the NFL really operates behind the scenes. According to the reports that came out during and after the draft, Shedeur's stock fell not because teams didn't think he could play, but because of how he and his father Deion Sanders handled the pre-draft process. There were reports of Shedeur walking out of interviews, performing poorly in meetings with head coaches, and Deion publicly saying certain teams weren't good fits, basically steering his son away from specific organizations. The NFL establishment didn't like that. They didn't appreciate a prospect and his father trying to exert control over where he ended up. The league has a process, a system that everyone is expected to follow. You show up to the combine, you run the drills, you take the measurements, you sit through the interviews, you smile and nod and tell every team exactly what they want to hear, regardless of whether you actually want to play there. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. And when Shedeur and Deion decided not to play that game, the league sent them a message by letting Shedeur drop in the draft further than his talent warranted. But here's where I'm going to take Shedeur's side for a minute, because there's another way to look at this entire situation that nobody in the NFL establishment wants to acknowledge. Why would a father who understands football at the highest level, who has seen the inner workings of multiple NFL organizations, who knows exactly how teams operate and which environments are toxic, why would that father try to steer his son away from certain situations? Maybe because he saw something the rest of us didn't. Maybe because he looked at organizations like Cleveland that have systematically ruined quarterback after quarterback and said, we're not walking into that disaster if we can avoid it. Think about it from Deion's perspective. He's watching teams that have no offensive infrastructure, no quarterback development program, coaching staffs on the hot seat, front offices that can't get on the same page, and he's supposed to enthusiastically send his son into those situations. Why? So Shedeur can become the next Baker Mayfield, the next talented quarterback who gets chewed up and spit out by organizational dysfunction, so he can be another name on the long list of Cleveland quarterback failures. That's not being difficult or unprofessional. That's being smart and trying to protect your kid's career and future. And here's where the Cleveland connection gets even more interesting and potentially more toxic. Kiper mentions in his rant that Kevin Stefanski wanted Dillon Gabriel, but Andrew Berry, the general manager, was pushing for Shedeur Sanders. So right from the beginning, before anyone ever took a snap, you have a fundamental divide in the organization about which quarterback they should draft. The head coach wanted one guy, the general manager wanted another guy, and they ended up taking both, which is just asking for disaster and dysfunction. Do you really think Kevin Stefanski is going to give Shedeur Sanders a fair opportunity to compete and prove himself when Shedeur wasn't even his guy? When Stefanski went into that draft wanting Dillon Gabriel and got overruled or forced to compromise by the front office. Come on, we've seen this movie play out in the NFL dozens of times. The coach wants his guy, and when he doesn't get his guy, the player who gets drafted instead gets sabotaged, gets buried on the depth chart, gets set up to fail, so the coach can say, see, I told you we should have taken the other guy. That's the environment Shedeur Sanders is walking into. A head coach who didn't want him in the first place. An organization that has destroyed every quarterback they've touched since they came back into existence. A fan base that's been tortured for so long they've lost faith in anything the team does. And a media environment where every mistake will be magnified, every struggle will be questioned, and every bad game will result in calls for him to be benched. That's not a development situation, that's a setup for failure. But Kiper isn't done. He keeps going, and this next part is crucial to understanding why this rant is resonating so strongly with people. He talks about how even if Shedeur gets in there and struggles, that doesn't mean he's bad. That doesn't mean he was overrated. That doesn't mean all those executives who had him graded as the top quarterback were wrong. Because quarterback success in the NFL isn't just about talent. It's about situation, coaching, supporting cast, offensive line, weapons, scheme fit, all of these factors that are completely outside the quarterback's control, but massively impact his ability to perform. But how many times have we seen talented quarterbacks walk into terrible situations and fail, only to go somewhere else and succeed? We literally just talked about Baker Mayfield doing exactly that. Sam Darnold was drowning with the Jets, looking like a complete bust, and now he's showing flashes of being a solid quarterback elsewhere. Ryan Tannehill struggled in Miami for years and then went to Tennessee and made a Pro Bowl. The list goes on and on. Quarterbacks need the right infrastructure, the right coaching, time to develop, and patience from the organization. Cleveland doesn't have any of that right now. What they have is a head coach who's probably on the hot seat after this season if things don't turn around. They have a front office that can't seem to get on the same page with the coaching staff about basic personnel decisions. They have an offensive line that's been inconsistent. They have a running game that's not what it used to be. They have receivers who are decent but not game changers. And most importantly, they don't have patience. Cleveland has proven over and over and over again that they will bail on a quarterback at the first sign of struggle, that they won't commit to a development plan, that they'll panic and make changes rather than sticking with someone and building around them. And here's what really gets me heated about this entire situation. What makes Kiper's rant so powerful and so necessary? The way the NFL handled Shedeur in the draft process was vindictive and petty and designed to punish him for not following their unwritten rules. Yeah, maybe Shedeur and Deion could have played the political game better. Maybe they should have been more diplomatic, shown up to every meeting with a smile, pretended they were thrilled about the possibility of going to every team regardless of their actual feelings. But why should they have to do that? Why should a generational talent have to pretend he wants to go somewhere that's gonna waste his career and potentially ruin his future? The NFL talks constantly about wanting players to be authentic, to have personality, to be themselves, to show individuality, but the moment a player actually does that, the moment someone tries to have even the smallest amount of control over their own career trajectory, the league punishes them. They make an example out of them. They teach everyone else that you better fall in line, you better play the game exactly how we tell you to play it, or we'll make you pay. And that's exactly what happened to Shedeur Sanders. The league sent him a message that they don't care how talented he is. They don't care what those 9 executives thought about his ability. He will respect the process. He will go where they tell him to go. And if he doesn't like it, they'll make his life difficult. But here's the part that should terrify Browns fans and simultaneously give Shedeur believers some hope. According to the analysis from people who understand the draft process, if Shedeur had just gone through everything normally, thrown at the combine, done all the interviews with a smile, played the political game the way the NFL expects, he probably would have gone somewhere in the 2nd or 3rd round. Maybe mid-second round is the estimate that's been thrown around. So we're not talking about a guy who fell from being a top 10 pick to going undrafted. We're talking about a drop of maybe 20 or 30 spots because he refused to kiss the ring and play by rules he thought were stupid. And now Cleveland has him. The same organization that Mel Kiper just torched on live television for ruining Baker Mayfield. The same franchise that's finished in last place 15 times since 2002. The same team that's had zero consistency at quarterback since 1999. The same coaching staff where the head coach didn't even want Shedeur in the first place. They have this talented quarterback, and Kevin Stefanski, who wanted Dylan Gabriel instead, is supposed to develop him and give him a fair shot. Can you see why this is a setup? Can you see why Deion might have been trying to steer his son away from exactly this kind of situation? But wait, because there's another layer to this story that nobody's talking about, and it involves ESPN, Todd McShay, and why we're not getting the kind of comprehensive draft analysis and quarterback evaluation that we deserve. And this connects back to Shedeur's situation in ways that might not be immediately obvious. Todd McShay, who was Mel Kiper's longtime draft partner at ESPN, just went completely scorched earth on his former employer, and what he revealed should make everyone question what they're watching on sports television, and how much of the narrative is being controlled by corporate interests rather than actual football analysis. McShay is now at The Ringer doing his own show, and he came out publicly and said that ESPN is actively blocking him and Mel Kiper from appearing together on any platform. Not his platform, not theirs, nowhere. And he didn't sugarcoat it or hide behind diplomatic language. He called it petty. He said those were his exact words. Petty behavior from a massive media corporation that should be above that kind of nonsense. Can you imagine? 2 guys who made draft coverage must-see television for years, who had genuine chemistry, who challenged each other and made the content dramatically better, and ESPN won't let them reunite because of ego and corporate insecurity. McShay broke it down perfectly when he explained what made his partnership with Kiper so effective. He said that in order to make compelling content with Mel Kiper, you have to challenge him. You have to be grounded in high-level content. You need sources throughout the league. You need years of perspective and experience. And it has to be your full-time job, not just something you dabble in. He's basically saying that Phil Yates, who replaced him at ESPN, and who by all accounts is a nice guy and competent at his job, isn't the right fit for Kiper. Not because Yates lacks talent or knowledge, but because the dynamic isn't there. The professional rivalry that made Kiper and McShay so watchable, the built-up rapport over years of working together, the ability to push back and challenge each other in ways that made the analysis better, all of that is missing now. And then McShay hits ESPN with an analogy that's absolutely perfect and devastating. He said ESPN is like the new girlfriend who's gonna block with their body the opportunity to let the public see the rapport the boyfriend had with his ex. It's jealousy, it's insecurity, it's pettiness, and it's completely accurate. ESPN is terrified that if Kiper and McShay get back together on another platform, even just for one show or one special, it's going to remind everyone what they're missing. It's going to show that the current ESPN product isn't as good, isn't as compelling, isn't as informative as what they had before. McShay even went philosophical about it, saying some of the richest people he knows are the pettiest and most insecure. You can give them private jets, yachts, multiple mansions, every material possession imaginable, but they'll never be happy or content. Other people's happiness makes them crazy because they can't replicate what you have, and that's ESPN right now. They're sitting on billions of dollars. They're the self-proclaimed worldwide leader in sports. They have all the power and resources and influence, but they can't handle the fact that their former employee might create something better somewhere else. So instead of competing on merit, instead of making their own product better, they just block the competition from happening. Now here's why this ESPN situation matters for the Shedeur-Sanders story and connects to everything Mel Kiper was saying. Todd McShay was one of the analysts leading the charge with reporting behind-the-scenes details about Shedeur during the draft process. He was the one breaking news about what happened in those interviews that went poorly, why teams backed off, how Deion was managing the situation and trying to control where Shedeur ended up. McShay had the sources throughout league offices and coaching staffs. He had the inside information that explained why Shedeur's stock was falling despite his obvious talent, and he wasn't afraid to report it even when it made Shedeur and Deion look bad, or difficult, or unprofessional. But here's the thing about McShay that separates him from hot take artists and clickbait merchants. He also understands the game from the player's perspective. He gets why a talented prospect and his father might want to control their narrative and avoid certain situations. He understands why they might not want to walk into an organization like Cleveland that destroys quarterbacks. So even though he was reporting the stuff that made Shedeur look bad during the process, he wasn't trying to bury the kid or ruin his reputation. He was just doing his job as an analyst, providing context and information that helped people understand what was happening. And even though McShay had Shedeur graded as a second-round pick while Kiper had him as a first-rounder, that difference in evaluation wasn't about questioning Shedeur's talent. It was about factoring in all the off-field stuff, the interview concerns, the perception that he was going to be difficult to work with, all the baggage that accumulated during the pre-draft process. But both of them, McShay and Kiper, understood that the talent was real, that the ability was there, that if Shedeur ended up in the right situation with the right coaching and support, he could be a legitimate starting quarterback in the NFL. So now we're watching this situation unfold where Shedeur-Sanders is in Cleveland with a head coach who didn't want him in an organization that historically destroys every quarterback they touch. And the two most credible and experienced draft analysts in the media can't even work together to give us proper coverage and evaluation of his development because of corporate pettiness and ego from ESPN. We're being set up to watch what could be a disaster in real time without getting the kind of analysis and context that would help us actually understand what's happening and why. But here's where I'm gonna flip the script and defend Shedeur one more time, because I genuinely believe there's a way this story could have a happy ending despite all the organizational dysfunction and challenges. Yes, Cleveland is historically a graveyard for quarterbacks. Yes, the Browns have made terrible decisions at that position for decades. Yes, Kevin Stefanski might not even want Shedeur on the roster. But sometimes, the best revenge, the most satisfying outcome is proving everyone wrong who doubted you or tried to bury you or put you in a situation designed for you to fail. Baker Mayfield thought he was going to be the savior in Cleveland, and it didn't work out despite his talent and effort. But what did Baker do after getting run out of town? He went to Tampa Bay and showed everyone he can play quarterback at a high level in the NFL. He proved that it wasn't all his fault, that when you put a talented quarterback in the right system with competent coaching and proper support, he can succeed and even thrive. Shedeur has that same opportunity, just in a twisted, backwards kind of way. If Shedeur can go into Cleveland and succeed despite all the chaos, despite the organizational dysfunction, despite having a head coach who didn't want him there, despite all the history of failure at that position, he'll instantly become one of the most respected players in the entire league. Because everyone who follows football knows how hard it is to win in Cleveland. Everyone understands the history and the pattern of failure. If Shedeur can be the one to finally break that curse, to give that franchise consistent quarterback play and leadership, his legend will be cemented forever. He'll be the guy who did what dozens of others couldn't do. And let's not forget something crucial about Shedeur Sanders that separates him from most rookies coming into the league. He's been preparing for this his entire life. He's been coached by one of the greatest athletes in sports history who understands pressure and spotlight and criticism at the highest level. He played at Colorado with the entire college football world, watching his every move, analyzing every throw, questioning whether he was only successful because of his father's coaching and name recognition. He's dealt with criticism and hate and doubt and media scrutiny that would crush most players his age. He's been through fires that most rookies never experience until they get to the NFL. So maybe all that preparation, all that adversity, all that pressure he faced in college is exactly what he needs to survive Cleveland. Maybe the fact that he and Deion tried to avoid this situation but ended up here anyway is part of some bigger plan or story. Maybe Shedeur is about to shock the world and prove that Mel Kiper was right all along when he said Shedeur was a first-round talent who got judged unfairly because of circumstances outside his control rather than his actual ability to play the position. The Browns have a choice to make right now, and it's going to define the next several years of their franchise. They can continue their established pattern of ruining quarterbacks, playing organizational politics, letting coaches and front office executives fight over who gets credit for which player, making panic moves instead of committing to development plans. Or they can actually commit to developing Shedeur properly, giving him the support and infrastructure he needs, building the offense around his strengths, showing patience when he inevitably makes rookie mistakes, and finally breaking the cycle that Mel Kiper just exposed on live television. Kevin Stefanski's alleged tactics of burying players don't have to win. The organizational dysfunction doesn't have to continue forever. Shedeur Sanders could legitimately be the guy who changes everything in Cleveland, who breaks the curse, who gives that tortured fan base something to believe in for the first time in decades. But it's going to take real commitment from everyone in the building. It's going to require Stefanski to put aside whatever ego or preference he had for Dillon Gabriel and give Shedeur a genuine fair opportunity. It's going to require Andrew Berry to support his quarterback and build around him properly. And based on Cleveland's history over the past 25 years, that's an enormous ask. This story is about way more than just Shedeur Sanders and the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation. It's about how the NFL treats young talent and tries to control every aspect of the process. It's about how organizations can make or break careers before they even really begin. It's about how media companies control narratives in ways we don't always see or understand. It's about whether talent and hard work really do win out in the end, or whether the system is designed to crush anyone who dares to be different or refuses to play the game exactly how they're told. Mel Kiper went absolutely nuclear, exposing Cleveland's dysfunction and pattern of destroying quarterbacks. Todd McShay revealed ESPN's petty corporate games that prevent us from getting the best possible analysis and coverage. And Shedeur Sanders is caught in the middle of all of it, trying to prove he belongs and can succeed at the highest level despite everyone telling him he should have handled things differently, should have been more political, should have just shut up and accepted whatever situation the league put him in. But maybe that's exactly what makes this story so compelling and why we're all watching so closely. Because deep down, we want to see if the kid who refused to kiss the ring, who let his father protect him from toxic situations, who didn't play by the NFL's unwritten rules, can still succeed and thrive anyway. We want to see if talent really does win out eventually, or if the system is too powerful and too entrenched to allow success for anyone who doesn't conform completely. Cleveland has a genuine chance to be part of an incredible redemption story. Kevin Stefanski has a chance to prove he's actually a quarterback developer who can work with talented players even when they weren't his first choice. And Shedeur Sanders has a chance to cement his legacy as the guy who did what nobody else could do, succeed as a quarterback in Cleveland. The question that remains is whether they'll actually take advantage of this opportunity, or whether this becomes another cautionary tale of wasted potential and organizational failure that we'll be talking about for years as an example of how not to handle a talented young quarterback. Only time will tell what happens next. But one thing is absolutely certain, we'll all be watching closely, and so will Mel Kiper, probably screaming at his television, hoping desperately that he was right about this kid all along.